Okay, so we're going to talk about how can we know that the Bible is reliable. All of redemptive history is recorded in the Bible for us to read. But you may have a question. Can I rely on this Bible as a source of truth? Is it a reliable book? Can I rely on it? That's the big question. So we're going to deal with this. We're going to show you, different views, different ways that we can look at the Bible and see that it is reliable. It can be reliable. All right? Okay, so let's begin. Okay, let's get seated soonest. Sally. Okay, I'll start calling names. Okay. The first point is that, the Bible is the most read book in history and in our modern age. It is of such great importance and demand that it was the first book to be printed on the Gutenberg mass-produced movable metal type. So in history, it was the first book to be printed, automated, right? Printed on the Gutenberg mass-produced movable metal type. It is the most translated and distributed book in the world in 2,454 languages. It is still the top most read book in the world over the last 50 years. You can look at some numbers on the right-hand bottom. So what does this mean? It means, number one, is that the Bible is reliable. Why are people reading it even up to today for the last 2,000 years and more? Being the most read, it is also the most well-evaluated book by the readers. It is a book that still speaks to the readers, that gives answers to problems in life. It is still a relevant book. And people have also tried to knock down the Bible for over 2,000 years. During the rise of atheism and the rise of different ideas, even within Christian circles, we have the liberals who come out and they try to knock down the Bible, but it has stood the test of time. So number one, the Bible is reliable because for 2,000 years, they have tried to knock it down, but yet they can't. It is still the most well-evaluated and a reliable book. And number two is it is still relevant because God is still speaking to man from the Bible. Man is still reading it because it provides answers to them. If the Bible is not relevant, you'll be obsolete, right? Nobody's going to read it, right? Many things have become obsolete in this world. Many, many things. But the Bible is not. Okay? Next, there is one unifying theme in the Bible across all 66 books of the Bible. Now, the Bible is not just one book. There are 66 books within the Bible, 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New. And it was written over a long period of time, 1,500 years, thereabout, by 40 different writers, thereabout. And guess what? There's no book like the Bible. Nothing like it, right? With 66 books, 40 writers, 1,500 years, yet under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, there is one common theme that builds up as if it was one book. Nothing like that at all. So, there's one meta-narrative, which is of redemption of mankind through Christ after the fall of man. Okay, and this one theme, it cuts across different genres. Okay, the Bible is so interesting. It's not just all narrative, all prophecies, but it has different genres. Historical narrative, poetry, wisdom, songs, prophecies, letters, apocalypse, and so forth. Okay, so this is an amazing book. And the other thing that's so interesting about Bible is that the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. Both are complementary and they support each other. Now, there is typology throughout the Old Testament that point to redemption in Christ. And this typology, which I will talk a little bit more later, okay, it's like a shadow that is fulfilled through Christ. At the same time, there are also prophecies in the Old Testament fulfilled in the New Testament. And that itself, all these are miracles, right? All this is not possible if this book was written by man. And you will see the wisdom and inspiration of God throughout the Bible. And through the unifying message of redemption, Holy Spirit speaks to us today with relevance to our lives, okay, even after 2 to 3 centuries. So it's not just a history book. It is a living book. It is a book of good news for you and I. Next, the scriptures have not changed over time. It's not corrupted. Some people say, oh, maybe in the process of copying by the scribes, one generation after another, maybe the Bible we have today is different from what it was originally. When the Dead Sea Scrolls was found, it was one of the greatest discoveries in our modern time. Before this 1947 discovery, many skeptics questioned copies of Isaiah in the Old Testament. Skeptics said that the book has been changed and revised by men throughout the centuries. It wasn't until scholars dated the Great Isaiah Scroll, one of the original 7 Dead Sea Scrolls found in 1947 in the caves of Qumran, that they discovered the book of Isaiah's amazing accuracy. The Dead Sea Scrolls copy of Isaiah dates 1,000 years prior to the copy previously possessed. And it was accurate. And today we have 5,600 Greek copies of the New Testament in possession, which is more than what we have of the work of Homer, Plato, Lucretius, and Aristotle. It dwarfs everything else. The New Testament is about 99.5 textually pure. This means that variants are grammatical and minor errors that occur in copy over time, but there has been no change in the overall teaching and the doctrine. This should give us confidence that we follow true teachings passed down by Jesus and the apostles. Next, let's talk about archaeological findings. Did the biblical stories happen? Are they myths? Are they just stories without real basis? The parting of the Red Sea sounds like a myth because, some people don't believe in miracles. The cessationists, if you don't believe in miracles, they will say this is just a myth or it was just a natural event. Are there archaeological evidence to confirm these events? Since they happened 2,000 to 4,000 years ago, surely it would be difficult to find archaeological evidence that survive, right? It would be reasonable to expect them to find maybe a few or at least some in order to prove that the Bible is true. So now we're going to launch into archaeological evidence, starting from the Old Testament, moving to the New Testament, to see what evidence do we have. Of course, some evidence are more significant than others. Some things will not change, right? If Mount Sinai is still there, it will still be there because a mountain cannot be moved. Sure, there are some arguments about whether the chariot wheels are accurate, are real. I've seen the documentaries. I think they are because, they showed the real live footage of the divers that went down. But some claim it's not real. Never mind. Even if that is not real, at least the big evidence is the mountain, Mount Sinai. Let's get into archaeology now. The Old Testament talked about Goshen and Joseph in Egypt. Is there any archaeological evidence? This is what they have found, archaeologists. Avaris, the ancient Hyksos capital, which corresponds to biblical Goshen and events in Genesis and Exodus, which is about 1900 BC. The Bible calls Joseph a Hebrew or Ivri in the Hebrew language. He is also called Haish, the man. The name Avaris means nothing in Egyptian. It may well be related to Joseph, the Ish Ivri or Hebrew man, according to Genesis 39 verse 14. So note that Joseph was prime minister of Egypt who saved them during the 7 years of famine. The Hyksos capital seemed to be named after Joseph, Ish Ivri, i.e. Avarish. So there seems to be good archaeological evidence and historical evidence pointing to Joseph and the biblical Goshen in Egypt today. Next, the parting of the Red Sea. The location of the Red Sea crossing. There was a problem in the past because they got the location wrong. If you look at the map, there are two parts, where they could cross. So the old theory was, okay, it was the part on the left, okay, but now they have found that it was the part on the right, okay. So what happened in the past was that because they had located wrongly the location of Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula, which is why they thought the crossing was on the left side. But today, okay, they have found the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, which is why they have also found the crossing point, which is the Nuweiba crossing. Okay, so evidence includes a beach at Nuweiba crossing where the Israelites camped, the marker pillars, the amazing reach of the crossing, and the chariot wheels overgrown with corals at the location of the crossing. Okay, so you can go and watch the documentary. It is pretty amazing. Okay, the documentary, a lot of details. Next, Mount Sinai is where God gave Moses the law for Israel, okay, in 1450 BC. And the real Mount Sinai, okay, is in Arabia, and it was determined in the 20th century. Okay, as mentioned, it was wrongly thought to be in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, previously kind of determined by Helena, the mother of Constantine. Okay, but today there are numerous archaeological evidence, the worship of the Egyptian cow god Apis or Hapi, the sheep sacrifices, and the burnt top of Mount Sinai. Okay, if you look at the pictures on the right. And guess what? One of the reasons why they found the real location of Mount Sinai is because they went back to the Bible. And they saw in Galatians 4:25, it says, "For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia," and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is. So the people who found the real Mount Sinai went back to the Bible, and it says Mount Sinai is in Arabia, is not in the Sinai Peninsula. As a result, they found the mountain, okay, and the top of the mountain is burnt, and below the mountain they have all the, the structures for animal sacrifices, and they also found carvings of the cow god Api. Okay, remember the story of Aaron and the people who went back to worshipping the golden calf. So all the evidence are there. Okay, very, very amazing. Next, I will show you archaeology evidence of the priestly blessing. The famous priestly blessing that we use for benediction in a lot of churches is from Numbers 26:22 to 27, okay, where we say, "The Lord bless you and keep you, the Lord make his face shine upon you," and so forth, right? So this is a very important blessing, okay, and it was recorded in the book of Numbers. Okay, so what happened is in 1979, there was an archaeologist who was excavating a burial cave, and he found 2 small silver scrolls. And when they rolled it up, okay, each of these were only 3 inches or 7.6 centimeters long. But when they studied it, it contained the priestly benediction from Numbers 6. Okay, the smaller scroll also contained, hang on. Yeah, the smaller one also contained the same benediction from Numbers 6. So it's amazing, right? These are all archaeological evidence. Next, there is this big rock called the Merneptah Stele, okay? And this is the earliest reference to Israel from Pharaoh. And this is in the Egyptian Museum. I've been there. I took a photo next to with this. But when I took the photo, I didn't know what it was all about. It was later that I found out, oh, okay, this was an important item, right? So this is an inscription by the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah in around 1213 to 1203 BC, which references Israel. It is the earliest reference to Israel from ancient Egypt. It confirms that ancient Israel existed in the land that Joshua led them into. Okay, I'm not going to go into the details. When I share all the details, you can read it yourself. Next. This place called En-Gedi, which is opposite the Salt Sea, or what do we call the Salt Sea today? The Dead Sea. Yeah, it's so salty that it's dead, okay? But in the Bible, Old Testament times, they call it the Salt Sea. And this place, when David was persecuted or hunted down by King Saul, he went to this place to hide, to escape as a refuge. Why? Because this place has a lot of caves, has a lot of waterfalls, so there's water supply, has a lot of deer, so maybe he has food to eat, So this place is located opposite the Dead Sea. Today is a nature park. If you visit Israel, you should go to this place. Okay, so around 1000 BC, David was there to hide from Saul, and he narrowly escaped Saul's grasp, before he fled into this wilderness. So here are some verses that talks about that time. 1 Samuel 23:29, it says, "Then David went up from there and dwelt in the strongholds of En-Gedi." So this place exists. Psalm 42, verse 1 and 7, it says, "As the deer pants for the water brooks, so pants my soul for you, O God. Deep calls unto deep at the noise of your waterfalls. All your waves and billows have gone over me." So there's a reference to deer, water brooks, and waterfalls. Guess what? All these are found in En-Gedi. Anyone been there before? No. Okay, some have. Okay, Betty. All right. Okay, next. King David. Was he a real person? Did he exist? Is there any references to him? There was an inscription by King Hazael of Damascus about the house of David. 3 fragments of Aramaic inscriptions were found, which date about 100 years after the death of King David, which is about 900 BC. They were a portion of the monument that was erected by King Hazael, the king of Damascus, which he had inscribed with the proclamation of victory over the house of David. King Hazael destroyed Israel and turned the kingdom into a vassal state. And so this is the evidence that the biblical King David was a real person and there was a dynasty, the house of David. Next, there was a Moabite stone. You know, the Moabs, they were neighbors to Israel. And this is called the Mesha stele. Okay? It's about Moabite King Mesha's war with King Jehoram of Israel. Okay, so the Moabite stone by King Mesha records his version of a war fought with Israel in 850 BC, which Moab revolved against King Jehoram of the northern kingdom of Israel. And the same incident was recorded in 2 Kings chapter 3. The two accounts are from their respective perspective. Mesha emphasizes his victories over Israel in capturing cities under Israelite control. The biblical writer, to the contrary, highlights Israel's successful counterattacks against the Moabites. This shows that the biblical events happened historically. Interestingly, the inscription also mentions the name of God of Israel, Yahweh. Next, Hezekiah's tunnel. Hezekiah, anyone been there? You walked through the tunnel? Anyone? Yes, huh? Okay. Hezekiah's tunnel was carved out within the city of David by Hezekiah in the late 701 BC. It corresponds to the biblical account in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 20, where Hezekiah was preparing for an impending siege by the Assyrians by diverting the water source from Gihon Spring westward to the city of David. Today, you can visit and walk through the tunnel in the city of David. Okay, so if you visit, please, walk through it. Next, are there evidence of Jewish exiles in Babylon? We know that the southern kingdom, was conquered and the people were exiled in Babylon. So, archaeology tells us there's a collection of more than 100 tablets dating to the Babylonian exile, which corresponds with the biblical text in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1, which is about 580 BC, where Ezekiel writes, "As I was among the captives by the river Chebar." The river Chebar is mentioned several times on the tablets. It confirms the biblical account that they were exiled to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. Next, this is very famous, is the Cyrus cylinder, which supports the idea of the Jewish return to their land after 70 years of exile. King Cyrus, very famous, powerful king of the Medo-Persian Empire, who conquered the Babylonian Empire, which had exiled the Jews earlier. He had the opposite policy of returning these exiles back to their original settlements. And this is evidenced by the Cyrus cylinder inscription, which today is on display at the United Nations. This is consistent with the biblical account in Ezra 6, verses 3 to 5, around 538 BC, where the king allowed for the exiles to return and rebuild Jerusalem. Okay, next, let us move to New Testament archaeology, all right? So, Old Testament, I think we've covered the whole range, all the way from Egypt, all the way to the return from exile, okay? Now, let's move to the New Testament archaeology. If you visit Israel, you will go to a church where there are water pots of stone. And these are what they used when Jesus turned water into wine. Okay, you know, I used to think that the water was kept in jars like on the right-hand side. Okay, those small jars, you know, like you pour water. Actually, these are made from rocks and it's very big, very, very high. Okay, so you can't use this, jar to pour water. You know, you got to put the water into this rock, okay, stone water pot. So the size of these big stone water pots confirms the biblical account that they were able to take water and pour into the water pots to fill them. And this is in contrast with our modern day thinking that these were small jugs used to draw and contain water. So we reference to John chapter 2, verse 6. It says, "Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone." Okay, imagine like the one there. "According to the manner of purification by the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece." Okay, this is quite big, right? 20, 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." And they filled them up to the brim. So it was amazing, right? When you visit Israel and you see this big thing and you read the Bible, it says, "Fill the water pots with water." You get an idea. They had to take water and fill up this water pot. Next, they found a boat, like the kind of boats that Jesus and his disciples used, okay, at the Sea of Galilee. And this is called the Sea of Galilee boat. It's at a museum just next to the Sea of Galilee, where you take the boat as a tourist to get onto the sea and to try fishing, throwing the net down and stuff, okay? So the finding of the Jesus boat, or a typical boat used during the time of Jesus, gives an idea what kind of boats the people in Jesus' time used, its size, etc. It corresponds with the artist's impression, like in the pictures below. So in Mark 4, verses 1 to 2, it says, "And again Jesus began to teach by the sea, and a great multitude was gathered to him, so that he got into a boat like one of this, okay, like this, and sat in it on the sea. And the whole multitude was on the land facing the sea, and he taught them many things." Okay, next item is the city of Capernaum, which is the launching pad of Jesus' ministry. He moved from Nazareth to Capernaum, where he launched his ministry. Okay, and Peter's house was in Capernaum. So today, Capernaum is in ruins. Okay, of course, I don't have time to get into that, where Jesus, proclaimed a curse over Capernaum because of their rejection of whatever, their lack of faith and rejection of the ministry of Christ. So Capernaum, the town in which Jesus used as a base for his ministry, is an archaeological site today. And the location of Peter's home, which was later used as a church, is identified. And today another church has been built over it. Okay, you can see that at the bottom left side. What about New Testament archaeology of the temple of Herod, the Western Wall? Okay, so the Western Wall today is the remains of the temple. So the big question is, did King Herod's temple exist? Jesus was there when he said that it would be destroyed after his death, and it was destroyed by the Emperor Titus. By the General Titus. Titus' father was the emperor, he was the general. It was a setting of the Matthew chapter 24 discourse, where Jesus talked with people, okay, at this location. Though the temple was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70, we still have the remains of the retaining wall with its huge stones. The Jews consider this as their holiest site, and they pray there. Today it is known as the Western Wall. What else? The question, Pontius Pilate, right, who was a governor of, presiding over the trial of Jesus, who condemned Jesus. Was he a real person? Was he a historical person? Did he exist in those days? The prefect of Judea. So Jesus was put on trial before Pilate by the Roman Pilate, the Roman prefect of Judea. Okay, and they found this stone, this inscription, and that was in 1961. Okay, so while working in the Mediterranean seaside ruins of Caesarea Maritima, a team led by the Italian archaeologist Antonio Frova found a sizable piece of limestone, slightly more than 0.8 meters wide and somewhat less than 0.7 meters high, that bears the name of Pontius Pilate. The Latin inscription read as follows: to the divine Augusti, okay, Emperor Augustus, okay, this Tiberium, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, has dedicated this. So he's a real person, right? There is archaeological evidence to it. In Matthew 27:24, it says, when Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I'm innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it. So he sentenced Jesus, he condemned Jesus, but he washed his hand. Okay? Next, what about the pool of Siloam? The Bible tells us that Jesus healed a blind man at this pool of Siloam. Did this pool exist? Yes, it is still in Israel today. You can visit it. Okay? The water flows from the Gihon spring into this pool. So there's a reference to it in John chapter 9, verses 10 to 11, where Jesus told the blind man, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So if you do the Hezekiah tunnel, you will probably end up at this place where the pool of Siloam was. Next, is there archaeological evidence of the way they crucified people, like how they crucified Jesus, 2,000 years ago? Yes. They found the remains of a crucified man outside Jerusalem that confirms the practice of Roman crucifixion and provides further insights into how the nails were driven through the hands and the foot to the wood. So it was literally piercing it through. And this is in line with the Bible records. Next, the place where Jesus was crucified is a place called Golgotha, or the place of the skull. Okay, it's always been, they were always looking for the place where Jesus was crucified. And there is this exact place called the place of the skull, okay, which is just outside, north of Jerusalem. If you look at the picture on the left, do you see the two eye sockets and the nose? It looks like a skull. And if you look at the picture on the right, you see that this is a higher ground, and Jesus was crucified lightly above it. Why? Because the Romans want to make an example of people whom they crucified so that the crowds could gather below and see who was crucified. So it was a high ground, which is in line with what we expect. Okay, so this is amazing. Of course, today, if you go there, the rock portion which made up the nose, it has eroded, it's fallen off. You probably, it's not as clear as before, but this is a picture that shows it clearly. So in John chapter 19, verses 17 to 18, it says, and he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha, where they crucified him and two others with him, one on either side, and Jesus at the center. Okay, next, what about the epistles? Let's go to the epistles. Is there any evidence? So there is this Erastus inscription, okay, which links to Paul's epistles. Paul's letter to the Romans around 57 AD from Corinth includes greetings from Erastus, the city treasurer or the manager or the steward, okay, some high-ranking official. Archaeologists found a large paving stone near the theater dating 1st century AD, which reads, Erastus, in return for his aedileship, laid this pavement at his own expense. Thus, the Erastus in the book of Romans is likely the high-ranking official who laid this paving stone. Next, fragments of the Gospel of John. You know, in the past when they write on papyrus, they write on, and then it's handwritten, basically, they copy the scriptures, right? So the earliest known New Testament manuscript is a fragment of the Gospel of John, known as the Ryland's Library Papyrus, written in Greek. The papyrus manuscript has been dated from 125 to 175 BC. So this gives us an idea about how they used to copy, the scribes used to copy and share the scriptures, basically. So the conclusion here is that there is abundant Bible archaeology that covers Old Testament, Gospel time, even the epistles. I mean, you can still visit those places, right? You can go to the 7 churches written in the book of Revelation. You can go to the island of Patmos today, where John was. So it's all real, and you can go there today, okay? So interestingly, there are no fossil records supporting evolution, macroevolution today. But you've got abundant Bible archaeology all over the land of Israel. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so this Bible, the accounts are real, it's true, because it is consistent with archaeology. Okay, it's not just made up stories, fables, and so forth, right? It's real. Okay, next, I want to move on to honest eyewitness and author accounts. You can rely on the Bible because the authors and the eyewitnesses who wrote it, they were honest. They tell the story faithfully, including negative events and negative portrayal of characters, even if they were kings or leaders. You compare this to, let's say, communist propaganda, right? Oh, everything must be good, good, good. Nothing bad can be said, or, removed. But the Bible tells it so faithfully as it is. Okay, for example, it talks about Abraham's failure to trust God, okay, for the child. It talks about the failure of Moses to enter the promised land. It talks about the moral failures of King David, the failures of Israel resulting in the exile, the cowardice of Jesus' disciples, the failure of Peter who denied Christ 3 times, the murderous nature of Paul before he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. It tells us faithfully. So it gives us the confidence, right? Telling events faithfully, such as women being the first eyewitnesses of the resurrection of Jesus, even though their testimony in those days were weaker than men. There was no effort to try to spice it up, to make it more attractive, more whatever. They told it as it is. It was the truth. The Bible is truth. And this is what we call the criterion of embarrassment, which supports the fact that the Bible can be relied on. Next, fulfillment of prophecies. God has shown himself to be God who fulfills prophecies, who tells things before they exist. So this one I won't go into detail, but key prophecies about the coming of Messiah were all fulfilled. Prophecies on Israel, their failure in the land, their exile, everything was all in the Bible before it happened. And it all happened according to it. So prophecies, that's direct prophecies, what God said. But there is another thing which is what we call fulfillment of typologies. Typology is very amazing because they refer to the idea that events, people, or institutions in the Old Testament, it foreshadows or prefigures events, people, or institutions in the New Testament, particularly related to Christ. So the Old Testament is a shadow, and the New Testament is the substance. The Old conceals the new, right, through events, but the new explains the old. Colossians 2:16, 17 tells us that all these things, right, be it festivals or even the Sabbath and so forth, these are all shadows of the things to come, but the substance is of Christ. The real fulfillment is Christ. So the whole of the Old Testament points to the New Testament. So I give you an example of people. The story of Joseph, Moses, David, they all point to Jesus in one way or another. Events like the Exodus or the entering of the Promised Land, it points to Christ. okay, leading us to the new Exodus and the new promised land. The institutions of the Old Testament, the law, the tabernacle, the offerings, the sin offering and so forth, the high priest entering into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, everything points to what Christ would do when He comes. And imagine this book was written, over a long period by different people, right? If it was not inspired by the Holy Spirit, you will not see typologies like this that matches so perfectly, so beautifully. And again, this is a big proof that Christianity is real, God is real. Okay, and feasts like the Passover, which is one of the most important feasts, it points to Jesus, the Passover lamb. Next, scientific confirmations of the Bible. Another amazing thing, right? We're all into science. The Bible was written between 1400 BC and 100 AD. This is before major scientific discoveries which happened only from 16th century onwards. God, who created the laws of nature, would know them long before the scientists discovered them. Okay, since the Bible is inspired by God, it should be consistent with the laws of nature and science. Okay, so I'll give you some examples. There are many, many things I can talk about, but some examples. The laws of quarantine. Before they understood what microbes were, right? Viruses, bacteria, there were laws of quarantine under the Old Testament. Numbers 5, 2-3. It says, command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, everyone who has a discharge, whoever becomes defiled by a corpse. You shall put them out, both male and female. You shall put them outside the camp. Quarantine them. Isn't it amazing? And the earth's free float in space is talked about in Job 26, verse 7. He stretches out the north over the empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. Okay, and this in comparison, in Islam, the earth is carried by Nun, the whale on his back. Next, the book of Isaiah talks about the circle of the earth. The earth is not flat. Even in those days, people thought it was flat. Isaiah 40:22, it is He who sits above the circle of the earth. Okay? In comparison, in Islam, the earth is flat like a carpet spread out. Okay, let us consider 10 such examples from the Bible from this video. I won't go into it. You can watch it. Okay? So I'm going to summarize right now these 10 points. Okay? How can we know that the Bible is reliable? First, it is the most read book in history and in our modern age, which means God still speaks to us. It is relevant. This is not a dead book. It's alive. It's not a history book. It is good news. Number two, it is the most evaluated book in history. People have tried to knock down the Bible for over 2,000 years, from liberals to atheists and so forth. But it has stood the test of time. It is reliable. And there's one unifying theme over 66 books, 40 writers, and over 1,500 years across different genres. And there's no other book that comes close to it. And the scriptures have not changed over time, as we have seen from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the 5,600 copies of the New Testament, apart from minor variations. And next, archaeological findings is consistent with and confirms the Old Testament history. And archaeological findings is also consistent with and confirms New Testament history. Number 7, honest eyewitness accounts of the Bible and the criterion of embarrassment tells us we can rely on it. Number 8, fulfillment of prophecies throughout history shows that it is from God. It is God's word. And better still, number 9, fulfillment of typologies pointing to Christ, right? Prophecy is very direct. Typology is shadow and substance, even more complex, but yet it all points to Christ. And finally, number 10, scientific confirmations of the Bible. Okay. So in 2 Peter 1:21, it says, holy men of God spoke as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. The Bible is inspired. Okay. 2 Timothy 3:16 says, all scripture is given by inspiration of God. No other book comes close to the Bible throughout history, not even close.